We are in our third week of our series, Marriage 101. And I know for some of you this series is difficult. For some it might be difficult because you are not married and you're simply wondering, and so how does this relate to me? Others of you are in a fractured marriage. It's hurting right now. And you wonder how this helps when my spouse and I aren't even on the same page or in the same place. Some of you have marriages that have already failed and come apart. And you're saying, this is all just too late. And you have all sorts of painful memories as we share stories and talk about things. For some of you, your spouse has died. And so when we talk about marriage, you say, yeah, that was my past. And again, for you, there are those memories, there's those longings that can be painful at times. But I hope that today, my desire today, is to provide some encouragement and hope for all of us. Today is not just about marriage. That's not what I want to talk about, just marriage today. It's rather about you and me as individuals, and how we see life and how we react to people and events of our lives. We all have filters that we use. And those filters create a huge impact on every relationship that we have, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's a spouse, parents, children. See, the greatest thief of joy and hope is not what's happening out there, not the circumstances. The greatest thief of joy and hope is what you or I are becoming inside of us. So that's what I want to talk about today. See, our attitude impacts everything. Attitude affects everything. Now, those of us who are passengers and not pilots, I'm a passenger, I'm not a pilot. We tend to think of altitude as the most important thing for a plane. Altitude is what you need to keep from hitting things, mountains and trees, things like that. But actually, the pilots say, no, it's attitude. Attitude meaning, that's the word they use to describe the position of the nose relative to the ground. Nose of the plane, not your nose, but the nose of the plane. That's what will determine either a good flight or disaster. In flight, if the nose of the plane is too low for too long, you're going to plow into the ground or to the ocean. If on landing, the nose of the plane is too high, you're going to come down with a severe bounce. If it's too low, you may lose control because you have too high of a landing speed. So the attitude is crucial. And pilots will maybe sometimes talk about this key principle, that the right attitude is what you need. The right attitude in spite of atmospheric conditions. Doesn't that kind of sound familiar to life? It's the right attitude that's important, despite what's happening around you. It's attitude. Why is it, in fact, do you think that some couples navigate storms of life well, while others are torn apart by frustration and disappointment and eventual despair? Why is it when you even look at their lives, there seems to be similar circumstances? You say, well, there's got to be something else going on here. In fact, analysts have all sorts of explanations they've come up with for a successful marriage. They say, well, it's because of long courtship, or because they have similar backgrounds, or because they have supportive families, or they've had good communication skills, or they're well educated, and it goes on and on and on. But the bottom line, the single trump card that can undo anything good is found inside. It's the attitude. And I'm not talking positive thoughts. I'm talking about what becomes the bent of your soul. Life is so short. The cost of attitude, of having a bad attitude, is so high. Because your attitude affects everything in your life. It's the lens through which you and I see the world. Just ask yourself this question, and please try as best you can to answer these questions honestly in your own heart. If you are married, if you're not married, your place at work, your place in the neighborhood, whatever it is, am I better at finding what is right or what is wrong in most circumstances? What's the bent of your soul? Easier finding right or wrong? Do I look forward to the future? Am I happy about the success of other people? Do I notice something good nearly every single day? Am I more likely to point out positive traits or the mistakes and the flaws in people? See, attitude has nothing to do with luck, your personality, your wiring. It has everything to do with your will. I know some people think, well, you know, I'm just kind of wired that way to look for problems. Or, you know, I'm just wired that way to always be happy, you know. Maybe you have a predisposed one way or the other. But in the end, it's your will, it's your choice, it's a decision. It's not determined by circumstances, but your attitude determines how you and I see the circumstances. It is a decision. Some people will say, in fact, I had some people just very recently tell me, it's easy for you to talk about, you know, faith and trust and all these kind of things because you've got all the breaks in life, not me. You've got things handed to you. I've had to work hard and I still come up short. In fact, right now, everything bad seems to be happening in my family. It's easy for you to say, you've got to have a right attitude. Well, I challenge a person who says that or thinks that to argue with Mabel. Mabel is a woman that John Ortberg talks about in one of his books. Mabel is in a state-run convalescent hospital. It's not a pleasant place. It's large, it's understaffed, it's overfilled with senile and helpless people who are waiting to die. Very lonely people. Well, Mabel was 89 years old, strapped in a wheelchair. Her face was an absolute horror. An empty stare with the white pupils because she was totally blind. She had a large hearing aid over one ear because she was almost totally deaf as well. And one side of her face was eaten away by cancer. I'm being graphic here because I want to tell you, I'm trying to help you to see the circumstances of her life. There was a discolored running sore on the side of her cheek. It had pushed her nose to one side. Her eye drooped. The corner of her mouth, instead of on the side, was down toward her chin, so she was constantly drooling. And she was alone, and she had been like that for 25 years. So, somebody asked her, Mabel, what do you think about when you lie here? And she said, I think about my Jesus. I think about how good he's been to me. He's been awfully good to me in my life, you know. I'm one of those kind who's mostly satisfied. Lots of folks wouldn't care much for what I think. Lots of folks would think I'm kind of old-fashioned. But I don't care. I'd rather have Jesus. He's all the world to me. Attitude does not have to be shaped by circumstances. It is a decision that comes out of your soul. And so if you or I say, I can't make that kind of decision problem is in your soul, your attitude. See, God in His Word, He says this about love. He said, love is not in words, it's not in feelings, and it's not determined by circumstances. If it was determined by circumstances, I would never love you because I see your circumstances, I know your heart. That's what God would say. But even while we were enemies, God demonstrated His love, you see. So it's not shaped by circumstances. Rather, though, love is alive, and it is a doing kind of thing because it comes out of who you are. And so the believers in the city of Corinth, were having problems with relationships and with life. And Paul writes to them, pointing out that the problem is not in your circumstances, it's not in the people around you, the problem is inside of you. The problem is in your soul. It is shaped by your attitude. And so he writes this in 1 Corinthians 13, which is just the opposite of how they were living in their relationships and their life. He writes, love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Let's go over that again. Think about it. It is patient. It waits. It waits in suffering. It waits through injuries. It waits through injustice. With all sorts of people, it's not going to seek retaliation. Because it is a belief, it is a decision that says something good is going to come out of this. Because God is still God. See, love is kind. It recognizes that everybody carries a heavy load. It's not just about me. Love is not filled with a jealousy, a resentment when somebody else gets the promotion, gets the spotlight, the acknowledgement. It doesn't blow things out of proportion and wound other people. Love doesn't seek its own advantage. It's not just about me. And often the opposite is seeking your advantage at the expense of others, wounding other people, causing pain. Love is not angry. It's not complaining. It's not always, oh, things are just falling apart. It's terrible. We're down the slippery slope. It doesn't also provoke anger in others. Don't you agree? Aren't you upset about this too? Or create anger. Love doesn't keep books on evil. It doesn't keep track of all the wrongs that have been done to me. Someday I'm going to get back. Love doesn't keep counting how many times I've forgiven. I'm almost there, 70 times 7, and I tell you, that's going to be it. Oh, and by the way, I want you all to know how many it's been, 435 so far. No, love doesn't do that. Love doesn't celebrate when you can pull something over on somebody else. I got away with that one. Love wants the truth to be known. It doesn't get upset when it is. Yeah, that's what I did. Yeah, that's who I am. I want you to know that. See, no matter how comfortable it is, love wants the truth to be known. Love never loses faith. It never loses hope. It trusts in God's care and protection and doesn't lose hope in other people. You are not a hopeless case. No, God can do something. God is still God. From start to finish, love bears and endures all things. It puts up with anything because it has a commitment to hold on and to keep holding on during whatever trouble, during whatever pain. Now the question is, did I describe you or not? What's your attitude? Has something gone wrong in your soul? Let's do an attitude check. All right, this is a marriage series. Let's think about marriage for a moment. Is my spirit right toward her? Ask yourself that and answer it honestly in your heart. Is my spirit right toward her? Are the things that I believe about her true or false? Is he really unconcerned about what I am going through right now? Does she really respond that way all the time? Is he really ignoring my needs on purpose? See, we mark everything either positive or negative. It's either positive or negative. Our brains are programmed a little bit like a computer. Before we put any sound, sight, smell, taste, touch, or intuition into our mental memory bank, our computers here, we stamp it either positive or negative. We do. We stamp it either positive or negative. Then we store the sensation in our brains, and that sensation remains there for a very long time. Just think about it. See, that's why you can't always remember a person's name, but you can remember how you felt about them. But unlike machines, we have a problem. Our problem is this: over time, we program our minds to be either mostly negative or mostly positive. We are not objective with each thing. So that we accumulate a negativity or maybe a positive. We start to see many things from the filter of who we have become. See, we create that habit of then stamping my circumstances. It was negative at work, it's negative at home, it's negative here, it's negative how I feel about myself. Everything becomes stamped in with a negative. A person with a bad attitude will still be a person with bad attitudes even when circumstances change. Our circumstances change with the weather, and attitudes seem to stay the same. And a negative person defends himself, herself, by saying, I'm only looking at reality here. But a positive person looks beyond the current situation to see possibilities, because God is still God. Neve and I and our two boys, before coming here to Maryland, we lived in Canada for 4 years, the plains of Saskatchewan. I was a teacher and had a pastoral role at a Bible college, a small Bible college. Well, it was roughly into our first year, maybe a little bit more. Because of financial problems in the school, everybody went without pay for 4 months. Some people became so bitter over that, began attacking the leadership. It's because of your mismanagement, because poor leadership skills. Eventually, some of those people were dismissed, and after they left, they sued the school for money that, of course, the school didn't have. But then there were others of us who said, man, we're going to have to trust God to provide here. And we cut back everywhere that we could. Some of us grew even more vegetables in the garden and shared. A farmer nearby slaughtered some beef and shared. And we drew close together, and we grew in a greater unity, a brotherhood, sisterhood than we had ever shared before. Those of us who said, God's still God. Let's just follow him. And I don't know how we survived. And by the way, we never recouped the pay. It was just gone. I could never pay it back. But we survived and we grew. It doesn't have to be stamped negative. Maybe you're thinking, oh, this doesn't apply to me. My attitude is stellar. So let's do a little checkup here, okay? How many of these statements have you recently thought or said to your spouse? And by the way, if you're saying, no, no, and she nudges you like that, maybe listen to her. So, if you disagree with something, so have you recently thought or said this? If you disagree with something I said or did, that means you don't love me. It's no use to keep trying to talk through our problems. We always end up fighting. You'll never forgive me for what I did, and I'll never forgive you. It's always going to be this way. Nothing will ever change. You've never really loved me. You never show me you love me. It's always about you. You are never wrong, and I'm never right. It's all your fault I feel this way. You make me act like this. I'm not being treated like I should. But you're not meeting my needs. I have a right to find someone else who will. This marriage is keeping me from living up to my potential. Does any of this sound familiar? If even a little bit, there's a negative stamp. See, you've marked so many things as negative, it becomes who you are. And that's why you keep on seeing negative things. That's why you keep feeling that despair and that hopelessness. There are triggers that create that negativity, or at least prompt it. Maybe it's fear in finances, or your spouse's imperfections, the sin that they are always holding on to. Maybe you feel neglected or disrespected. Maybe you're just overwhelmed with everything that is to do. But see, those circumstances are not really what made you do it, made you stamp it negative. You decided to. You chose to. In fact, there was a woman who has said, my husband has been without a job for 3 years. There's something good about that. I said, what could be good about that? You'd stamp it negative right away, wouldn't you? She said, there's something good about it. We can't afford cable TV, so we talk a whole lot more. She said, quote, these 3 years have been tough, but we've learned a lot. We've discovered so many things that we can do without that everybody else thinks they need. And life has been good. You say, how? I have had so much negativity here in not only my own heart, but my household, my life. How do I cultivate a positive attitude from all these negative circumstances? The answer is this. Take responsibility. Take responsibility for your attitude, for the decision of how you will see this. Okay, so maybe you come home. You come home and you say, and you're thinking, I got some good news to share. Or you're thinking, I got a really difficult situation at work I want to talk about. So you share that with your spouse, and you just get kind of a lukewarm response. So you come back later and you say, you really upset me. Well, the truth is, he or she didn't upset you. You did it yourself, to yourself. Because you jumped to a negative conclusion. You said, lukewarm response, he doesn't care that something happened to me. He's only interested in himself. And maybe the lukewarm response was because he's thinking, she doesn't even care about the terrible day I had. She just wants me to listen to her, pour out my heart for her. Stop the negative evaluations. Stop it. And remember, no one can make you unhappy. Everyone is responsible for his or her own attitude, and you have a decision to make right there and then. We had as many of you have experienced or are experienced in your stage of life, we had a very hard time caring for my parents until they died, and then Neva's dad until he died. And there were others who shared burdens greater than ours. And Alina, who was caring for Neva's dad, oh, what she went through, just the constant care and out of love she gave, and it was wonderful to see. But you know, when you're caring for parents, it can be a very hard thing. Or caring for a spouse. Things like inconveniences. The boys have to give up their bedrooms because now parents are in there. And you have to move to a new place so you can take care of them. And more costs because now you need a larger house because they've got to have room for them too. And there's the upset of the daily schedule. You've got to plan something to keep them occupied or to take them to the doctor, and everything kind of revolves around that from now on. And then there is the ingratitude maybe that you get back from then. Oh, you're just after our money. That's why you keep us around here. That type of thing. And then you're feeling all of this guilt because you're saying, I should graciously be caring for them because that's mom and dad, and they cared for me when I was young. So you got that guilt as well. You got the sadness and the regrets at seeing them deteriorate. It is hard. And you know what I found myself doing? Negative, negative, negative. Negative, negative. So I look at the boys sometimes. Negative. My wife says, "Could we go do something?" Negative. Take responsibility. Take responsibility over your self-pity. Oh, I'm not appreciated. Everything that I've given up, don't they see that? Don't they understand? Self-pity. Take responsibility over the blame. She's the problem. When I was pastoring in Oregon, I had to travel lots of miles to get to all the people. I mean, lots of miles. And so I remember one time in particular, I was going to go in the morning. I was going to be back by noon, and I was actually talking with a new believer. We were riding together and encouraging him in the faith and talking about witnessing to others of his group. And then after a while, he said, I know a guy who's in the recording business, and so we stopped over at his studio, and he was showing me stuff like that, and it got to be afternoon, and I hadn't. And so I drove home. And I was expecting to tell Neva all these wonderful stories that I had with this guy and where I went and everything. And as soon as I walked in the house, I was smart enough to pick up a little bit. And what's wrong? Wouldn't talk. Finally, it came out kind of exploding. You didn't call. Well, no, I wasn't nearby. This is before cell phone days, by the way. I couldn't get to a phone easily, but I mean, it was great things God was, but you didn't call. Right away, what I do is I start to have this self-pity, she's attacking me, this blame. I didn't call? So you're more interested in having a phone call than the wonderful things God is doing through me in these people's lives? Well, it wasn't until maybe a day or two later we were really able to talk about it. And it was that she was concerned about my safety, and other people in the church needed to reach me. How could she get a hold of me? She didn't know where I was. But it's so easy to think, she's the problem here. Maybe she was thinking I was the problem too. I don't know. And that builds a resentment over time. A resentment. You hold on to that disappointment and that pain and that anger. You tend to justify it. She's like that all the time. He never calls. He's always like that. And it becomes a poison, a tape that is played over and over and over. And it triggers more negative emotions. And you start to see more negative everywhere. And in fact, that confirms that she's the problem. And it starts to affect every relationship. Have you been there? Are you there now? Choose then to reinterpret and adjust. Choose to reinterpret and adjust. Decide to see the situation and the person differently. And I got to tell you, God got a hold of my heart. When we were caring for my parents, and I started to learn to see things differently, to choose to reinterpret what was happening, to realize it wasn't about me, it's about them. What's it going to be like when all of my freedom is limited, when my body is failing, my mind is going, whatever it happens in my old age? How hard is that really going to be? With my parents, it's not about me, it's about them. And I think about some of the fun that we did have. For one of the very few times that I can ever remember when we were bringing them back home to live with us, I saw my dad's hand go over and hold my mom's. I thought, wow, I'd never seen that. We were sitting around the table, and I always wondered, is my dad really saved? But we were sitting around the table at Thanksgiving, and I had everybody share when they came to faith in Jesus. And it came his terms, and I thought he'd say, maybe nothing, just next. He said, I did that too when I was young. Had to probe a little bit, but yeah, he's a believer for sure. Oh, my mom and their Alzheimer's did some really funny things that the boys and I and Neva, we laugh about, we describe. It's become family legends. Choose to reinterpret. When we moved to Dallas for my PhD studies, we left a healthy pastorate in Oregon. The people had become our friends. And Neva's family lived up there as well. So friends, family, God blessing, good things happening. And it was a great place to be. But we really felt I felt, probably more than Neva, God was calling me back to school. And so we got somebody else to take my place. We left family and friends. Oh, it was tearful. It was hard. It was very hard. Went down to Dallas, a place that we thought was set for us, a house we were going to rent from a Christian family. Hadn't seen it before. Pulled into it, started to unload our stuff, and discovered that not a single appliance worked. There wasn't hot water. You touch the faucets and they fall off in your hand. They break right off. They're so corroded. Both the boys got bacterial infections because the carpet was full of urine and stuff. And Neva had to start work in 3 days, so we tried to fix it up, but we were running out of time. We didn't have time to look for another place. That was one of the darkest seasons of our life. It was like God said, here's my will, follow it. And we stepped into this open door, and it slammed shut behind us. And here we find ourselves in this situation, and then a phone call that says, and the deal on your house, remember you were selling your house in Oregon? It fell through. You're stuck with a house up here now too. What are we going to do? I tell you what you need to start to do. You need to realize God did not trick us. God is still God. We sought His leading. Here we are. So, God, what do you have in mind here? So start by praying. Start by praying for God to change your heart, not the circumstances, but your heart, because it's from your heart that you're marking it negative and not positive. That it is despair and not hope because of your heart, not the circumstances. And ask Him to give you the ability to look beyond, to see with eyes of faith the possibilities. Ask Him to expose the selfishness, the prideful attitudes in your heart. Because I can tell you honestly, and even I in our relationship, it was like that at that moment. We were blaming each other for the situation we were in. She must have had, she didn't express it that way, but she must have had terrible resentment toward me for hauling her away from Oregon. And it was coming out in ways that I thought that, I don't know if we're going to last. But God, I got the wrong heart here. I'm prideful. I'm selfish. Repent and be forgiven. And then trust. Adjust to the things beyond your control. So we started to look for what God had. We started to get involved in people's lives. God did provide another place for us the very next week. It was amazing what He did. We started to have relationships, and we saw 3 nurses at the hospital come to faith. Another rededicate her life. We saw some counseling situations through the seminary. We saw connections with neighbors. We saw God at work. But we wouldn't have seen it unless we decided to look at it differently through faith, through forgiveness, and through thankfulness. Let me just read this passage for you from Philippians 4. Listen to the words that deal with attitudes, negative and positive. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about everything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Fear, worry, anger, anxious, negative attitudes. The positive. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be seen. God is near. Thanksgiving, peace. Let your mind think about the things that are true and positive. We say, but I gave this over to God. I asked Him. I prayed. I cried out. I didn't want to worry about it anymore. So even with Thanksgiving, God is still God. I believe that. And there was this peace for a while. But you say, what happened to it? Why is it gone? A peace that guards your minds and hearts from the fears. You say, what happened to it? I'll tell you what happened to it. It's the second part there. Whatever is true, whatever is right, whatever is noble, and all of these things, let your mind dwell on them, and you didn't. You started to replay negative, negative, negative. Look at all the negative. Oh, it's negative, it's negative, it's negative. Because if you really see what is true, and you believe, and you think, and you play that tape over and over and over and over again, then the God of peace will be with you. Hope is the anticipation of good. It's not based on circumstances or the other person. It comes from the God of peace. A decision to trust, to be thankful, to forgive. It is found inside you in the condition of your soul. So how is your soul today? Do you have a decision to make? A decision of faith and surrender? Make it. And if you want somebody to pray with you, we're going to have a team right back here. Little badges, Sunday prayer team. Seek them out. Let them pray with you. Thank you, Father, that you are still God, and you are faithful, and you are good and gracious. Let our hearts, as well as our minds, dwell on that. In Jesus' name.